Russia's Transport Minister Maxim Sokolov announced Moscow's readying to resume flights to Cairo in February next year. The news comes after Monday's visit by Russian President Vladimir Putin to Egypt, where he announced Cairo has implemented significant security upgrades in its airports and was ready to receive Russian tourists.
Russian security services reported to me that in general we are ready to open direct air service between Moscow and Cairo.
Russia grounded all flights to Egypt in October 2015, following a deadly explosion on board a Russian passenger jet over Sinai. It was the biggest catastrophe for Russian civil aviation and claimed 224 lives. The resumption of direct flights has been long anticipated by the Russian tourism industry.
It means a green light for tour agencies who can now, as soon as Egypt is open, start selling tours in that direction.
But so far, Russian planes will only be landing at Cairo's airport. The two most popular Egyptian destinations for Russians, Sharm el-Sheikh and Hurghada, remain suspended over security concerns.
The Egyptian authorities are planning to increase the number of domestic flights from Cairo to help Russian tourists reach the coastal resorts.
Russia's biggest airline, Aeroflot, says it is readying to reopen its offices in Egypt soon. Moscow and Cairo have agreed earlier this week to boost cooperation on many economic projects. That means the number of businessmen and government officials traveling between the two capitals is poised to significantly increase in coming months. Daria, Bondarchuk, CGTN, Moscow.
Obviously, this is a pretty big deal for Egypt, so let's expand this conversation. Yasser Kim joins us now live from Cairo. Daria Bondarchuk is also live in Moscow as well. Daria, let's start with you. What sort of conditions did the Russian government set in order for these flights to resume?
Well, Russia wanted that Egypt steps out security measures at the airports and also signs a joint aviation security protocol. Russian inspectors visited the Cairo airport and other air hubs throughout the past 2 years and asked for extra security measures, which included installation of fingerprint gates at the entrances to the terminals 1 and then later in terminal 2 and 3 of the Cairo airport. Also, Russia demanded for the luggage to be sealed after it has been X-rayed and then loaded on the plane, and the same for beverages and food and beverages compartments as well, to be sealed after they're loaded, after the X-ray to be loaded. Also, Russia requested for extra security for passengers, security checks for passengers, that they have to take off their shoes and belts going through security checks before boarding the plane. And also, Russia wanted for kiosk-shaped machines to be installed that are designed to trace and detect traces of explosives that could have been carried on board. So these are just some of the measures, and Russia also wanted to have more works, but in order to separate Russian visitors and have a separate arrival halls for them. It is not clear whether that has been met, but indeed now this protocol signed and this agreement between Russia and Egypt to resume flights, but it's next year so far.
Indeed. Yes, so the deal has been signed. We've been waiting for it for a long time. So flights are coming back, at least in the first quarter of 2018, but only to Cairo.
Yes, it will start in February, 1st of February to Cairo, and according to both ministers, the Egyptian Minister of Aviation and the Russian Minister of Transport, that there will be another meeting in April to decide when to resume flights directly to the resorts in the Red Sea, such as Sharm el-Sheikh and Hurghada. But at the moment, yes, it's only Cairo International Airport, and the government, the Egyptian government, is preparing some flights to connect the travelers from Cairo to the resort cities around the country, as Cairo International Airport will be like a transit area.
Indeed. So, Daria, this deal, though, I mean, we expected this to have been signed much, much earlier. What caused the delays in the past?
Well, indeed, Russia kept insisting that not all security measures have been implemented following multiple visits of Russian transport officials to Egypt, to the Cairo airport and other air hubs, overseeing the works that are being implemented to meet Russia's demands for security. Russia also has been saying one of the previous demands were that Russian aviation experts and security experts could work in the Cairo airport to inspect how the planes are being loaded, the cargo load, and also have a chance to oversee how the passenger security checks is coming along. And of course, this is in a way of violation of Egypt's sovereignty and its responsibility to check transit passengers and also domestic and international passengers at its air hubs. But apparently some negotiation, some decision appears to have been made and arranged, some compromise reached on these demands. This of course comes after Vladimir Putin's Monday visit to Egypt, where he met his Egyptian counterpart El-Sisi, and they've discussed a number of economic cooperation projects. And this decision comes as Russia has announced sort of a stepped-up cooperation with Egypt and boosting its ties, security cooperation and economic cooperation following that Monday visit.
Indeed, yes. So let's come back to tourist traffic data from the central bank. Indicates that traffic from Europe has fallen by well over 50% from the 2012-2013 fiscal year to 2015-2016. So other than Russia, which got out of the equation around October last year, what exactly has happened with tourist traffic from Western Europe?
Well, if you look at that time, that's the timing where the second uprising happened. We had one in 2011, one in 2013, and that's where there became fear of coming to Egypt. That's where the slide began. And then you had even the Russian passenger jet in 2015 had an effect on other countries as well. They decided also to reduce the number of flights to Egypt. They did not put a ban like Russia did, but they did, for example, put a ban on Sharm el-Sheikh in particular, where the passenger plane went down, and they left other cities like Hurghada open. However, also there was fear of coming to Egypt at that time. Now things are opening up. The British, the Germans, the Italians have opened their flights completely to all the resorts in the last 6 months. And now the Russians for next February, so it's easing down. But the effects, obviously, of the uprising and the Russian passenger jet had an effect on other markets, not just on the Russians.
Indeed. One last question to you, Daria. GDP in Russia has contracted for about 2 straight years in 2015 and 2016. But as growth recovers and the dollar-ruble rate stabilizes a bit, can Russian households now afford to splurge on holidays in Egypt?
Well, some of the tourist industry experts I've been talking to earlier today say that even if the Cairo destination indeed is open in February, it would still take some time before sort of Egypt becomes again one of the top 2 tourist destinations for Russians, as it was before that tragic incident in 2015. In the first half of 2015, according to Russian statistics, about 20% of Russians, all Russians traveling abroad, went to Egypt. Of course, now these numbers have changed, and Egypt has a lost sort of Russian market. But there are hopes, of course, that it will be able to regain its positions in the Russian for Russian tourists as number 1 or 2 destination fairly quickly. But it will all depend on how quickly the destinations of Sharm el-Sheikh and Hurghada, the top 2 popular tour Egypt destinations for Russian travelers, will be opened, and when exactly they will be opened. Because if it happens in early in spring, in February and March, there will be still no competition for Egypt in terms of price and distance and the comfort of travel and for the Russian holiday makers. At current stage, the return ticket to Cairo is about $600, which is double the price compared to what the charter flights were 2 years ago. So it will all depend on when Hurghada and Sharm el-Sheikh are back on the map for Russian tourists in Egypt, and how quickly the tourist companies also will be able to adapt and start selling package deals for Russian tourists, and possibly offering some good discounts and deals to attract Russian tourists and win Russia back.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Daria Bondarchuk in Moscow in Russia, and of course Yasser Kim there in Cairo in Egypt.